You're not a scientist, Elias. You're a daydreamer playing with a microphone, and frankly, you're an embarrassment to this family. Those words didn't just hurt, they felt like a physical blow to the chest. I can still see my father's face, that mixture of pity and disgust, as he tossed my research proposal onto the table like it was a piece of trash. I had spent 3 years developing a theory on how specific sound frequencies could stimulate seed germination and attract pollinator species to dead zones. My research team at the university had called it fanciful nonsense. My family, a dynasty of rigid engineers and surgeons, called it a joke. In one afternoon, I lost my funding, my professional standing, and the respect of the people I loved most. I remember walking out of that house with nothing but a suitcase and a handheld recorder, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears, louder and more piercing than any frequency I had ever studied. They didn't just tell me I would fail. They told me that my passion was a symptom of a delusional mind. So I disappeared. I didn't go for revenge, at least not at first. I went for survival. I retreated into the silence of the forgotten places. I spent 5 years in the most desolate corners of the globe, living in tents, sleeping on damp earth and listening. I dove headfirst into acoustical ecology, an obscure science that most of the world didn't even know existed. It was grueling. There were months where I survived on canned beans and sheer willpower, recording the songs of dying forests and the haunting silence of bleached reefs. I was mocked in journals. I was called a sound chaser and a quixotic fool. But while the world was looking at the soil and the water, I was listening to the air. I discovered that ecosystems aren't just chemical balances, they are symphonies. When a forest goes silent, it's not just a symptom of death. The silence itself prevents the rebirth. I learned how to curate acoustic lures, soundscapes that could trick migratory birds into returning to barren lands and stimulate the biological clock of dormant seeds. I wasn't just recording nature, I was learning how to conduct it. The struggle was a lonely, grinding ascent. There were nights when the weight of my family's rejection felt like a mountain on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Every time I hit a dead end, I could hear my father's voice telling me I was an embarrassment. But that pain became my fuel. I stopped seeking their approval and started seeking the truth. Then, the breakthrough happened. I developed a systemic restoration method, using environmental acoustics that could revive dead zones 10 times faster than traditional reforestation. Suddenly, the fanciful nonsense was being hailed as a global miracle. I wasn't just a scientist anymore. I was the architect of the Great Green Recovery. I had transformed thousands of acres of wasteland into thriving, humming cathedrals of biodiversity. 10 years after I was cast out, I returned home. I didn't call ahead. I didn't send a letter. I simply drove back to my hometown, a place that had become a mirrored image of the sterility my family loved. Gray, silent, and dying. My family's estate sat on the edge of a valley that had been stripped bare by industrial runoff decades ago, a wasteland of cracked earth and skeletal trees that had been declared biologically dead. I parked my car at the edge of their property. My father and siblings were standing on the porch, looking at me with that same condescending curiosity. "Still playing with your toys, Elias," my brother sneered, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't recognize the man standing before him, the confidence in my stride, the stillness in my gaze. I didn't answer him. Instead, I walked to the center of their dead valley and activated the array of acoustic emitters I had installed in secret over the previous 48 hours. I pressed a single button. At first, it was a low, rhythmic thrum, a frequency that felt like a heartbeat vibrating in the marrow of your bones. Then it opened up into a complex, layered symphony, the precise sonic signature of a healthy, ancient rainforest. The air seemed to shimmer. Within an hour, something happened that defied their logical world. Birds, species that hadn't been seen in this valley for half a century, began to descend from the horizon, drawn by a song they couldn't resist. Insects swarmed in a shimmering cloud of gold and iridescent blue. The valley didn't just look different, it felt alive. The oppressive silence that had defined my childhood was shattered by a roar of biological triumph. My father walked down the porch steps, his face pale. He looked at the birds, then at the lush, sudden vibrancy of the land, and then at me. For the first time in my life, he was silent. "How?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I listened," I replied softly. "While you were telling me I was a failure, I was learning the language of the earth. You called my dream ridiculous because it didn't fit into your blueprints. But the world doesn't run on blueprints, Dad. It runs on harmony." The look on their faces wasn't just shock. It was the crushing weight of a decade of missed connection. They realized that the embarrassment of the family was the only one among them who had actually changed the world. The poetic justice wasn't in their regret, but in the fact that the very land they owned, the land they thought was worthless, was now a sanctuary because of the science they had ridiculed. I didn't gloat, I didn't scream. I simply looked at them with a profound sense of peace. I had found a fulfillment that no amount of their approval could have provided. As I drove away, leaving them standing in the middle of a singing forest, I realized a truth that I want anyone listening to hear. The people who try to shrink your dreams are usually just terrified of the scale of your potential. Their doubt isn't a wall. It's a filter. It filters out the weak and leaves only those with the grit to turn their pain into power. I left behind a valley of life and a family of ghosts, and for the first time in my life, the silence was finally gone. I was no longer the echo of their expectations. I was the conductor of my own destiny.